In 1970, archaeologists working along the western shore of the Dead Sea uncovered something they did not understand. A blackened lump, roughly the size of a fist. It was found inside the burned ark of a synagogue, destroyed in the 6th century. They knew it had once been a scroll. They did not know what was written on it, and they were certain they would never find out. For the next 45 years, the object sat in a drawer in Jerusalem, untouched, unread, too fragile to open, too valuable to throw away. A piece of charcoal that the desert had decided to keep. Then, in 2015, a team in the United States placed the object inside a medical scanner. They were not unwrapping it. They were not unrolling it. They were attempting something no civilization in history had ever done. They were reading a scroll without touching it. What appeared on their screens was the opening of the book of Leviticus, word for word, letter for letter, identical to the Hebrew text read in every synagogue and printed in every Bible for the last 1,000 years, identical to a text copied in secret, in fire, in exile, across 50 generations. They had not just recovered a burned book, they had opened a window onto something far stranger. This is the story of what artificial intelligence found inside the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is not a story of forgeries. It is not a story of hidden gospels. It is something the academic world is still trying to absorb. Because what the technology revealed was not what was written. It was how it was kept. And how it was kept should not have been possible.
To understand what happened in 2015, we have to return to 1947. A Bedouin shepherd, searching for a lost goat along the cliffs near the Dead Sea, threw a stone into a cave. He heard pottery crack. When he climbed inside, he found tall clay jars wrapped in linen. Inside the jars were scrolls. He could not read them. Almost no one alive could. The scrolls passed through antiquities dealers, scholars, smugglers, and skeptics. When the first one was finally unrolled in a Jerusalem hotel room, the scholar's hands trembled. He was looking at the book of Isaiah, a complete copy, written more than 1,000 years before any other surviving manuscript of Isaiah on Earth. Over the next decade, 11 caves were excavated along that stretch of cliffs. From them came roughly 1,000 manuscripts. Some were complete. Most were fragments, some no larger than a fingernail. Together, they form the oldest collection of biblical texts ever recovered. And every fragment is older than the Roman destruction of Jerusalem.
For decades, the assumption was simple. A single sect, most likely the Essenes, a separatist Jewish community living at Qumran, had copied and preserved these texts. They lived austerely. They believed the end was coming. And when the Romans approached, they hid their library in the caves and waited for a world that never returned. But almost from the beginning, scholars working with the scrolls noticed something they could not fully explain. The handwriting in the manuscripts varied. The materials varied. The condition varied. Some scrolls looked rushed. Others looked formal, almost ceremonial. It was as if many hands had touched these texts, far more hands than one small community could account for. For 70 years, this question stayed unresolved, because to compare 1,000 manuscripts written across centuries by hands that were dust before Christ required something the human eye alone could not deliver. Then a different kind of eye arrived.
What artificial intelligence brought to the Dead Sea Scrolls was not interpretation. It was vision. The ability to see what was always present, but never visible. To detect patterns no human reader could hold in mind at once. To compare 10,000 letter forms across 1,000 fragments in the time it takes to draw a breath. It began with imaging. Multispectral cameras revealed ink that had faded into the parchment, words the human eye could no longer see. Then came volumetric scanning, the ability to look inside scrolls that could not be opened. The Ein Gedi scroll was the first to be read this way. It would not be the last. In 2021, researchers at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands trained a neural network on the handwriting of the Great Isaiah Scroll, the same complete manuscript that had been unrolled on a hotel desk 74 years earlier. They were looking for a question no one had been able to answer. Was this scroll written by one scribe, or by more than one? The network found something. 2 scribes, not one. Their handwriting was so similar that for 2,000 years, no human had separated them. They had been trained, almost certainly, in the same tradition, perhaps the same school, perhaps father and son. They had worked in turn on the same sacred text, and the seam between them had been invisible until now. If 2 hands could be hiding inside one scroll, the next question wrote itself. How many hands were hiding inside the rest? Across the full corpus, across the 1,000 manuscripts, the 11 caves, the centuries of preservation, how many people exactly had touched these texts? As the imaging improved and the models grew more sensitive, the answer kept rising. Not one scribe, not 2, dozens. Studies across the wider corpus have identified large numbers of distinct hands, far more than any single isolated community could plausibly have contained. The picture began to shift. And the machine could read more than identity. It could read condition. Some texts showed strokes drawn with calm, ceremonial precision. Others showed strokes drawn under strain, pressure marks,
tightened curves, the tremor of a hand working too quickly. Across the corpus, there were scribes who had worked in peace, and there were scribes who had worked as if running out of time.
What the machine had revealed was not a sect, it was a movement. Many hands, many places, many decades. The Dead Sea Scrolls had not been the private library of a single closed community. They had been the surviving record of a far wider effort. And that raised a question that should not have had the answer it does. Every act of copying creates variation. Even the most careful scribe will eventually make a mistake. A letter dropped, a word repeated, a line skipped because two lines ended with the same word. This is not negligence. This is the nature of the hand. Over generations, those small errors compound. They cascade. They build into divergent versions of the same text. This is how nearly every ancient text we possess has come down to us. In families, in branches, in conflicting manuscripts that scholars compare across centuries to reconstruct, as best they can, the version that might once have stood at the beginning. The further back you go, the more the branches divide, the more the original recedes. And then there are the Dead Sea Scrolls. When scholars first compared the biblical manuscripts from Qumran to the standardized Hebrew text used in synagogues 1,000 years later, the text we now call the Masoretic, they prepared themselves for radical differences. They did not find them. Where the texts differed, the differences were small. Spelling variations, occasional word order, a handful of readings genuinely altered. But the substance, the language, the structure, the architecture of the books themselves had not moved. Across 1,000 years of secret copying, through Roman occupation, through the destruction of the temple, through exile and dispersion across 3 continents, the text had held. Which forced a question that no model of casual transmission could answer. If many hands had copied these texts across many generations, in many places, and the texts had still not drifted, then what exactly had those hands been doing? Which is why the Ein Gedi scroll matters in a way that took years to fully understand. The synagogue at Ein Gedi burned in the 6th century after Christ. That is nearly 1,000 years after the latest of the Dead Sea Scrolls was placed into a cave. 1,000 years of copying, 1,000 years of risk, 1,000 years in which any drift, any human error, any quiet substitution would have been entirely expected. When AI rendered the burned scroll readable, the verdict came in 2 layers. The first was the words themselves. The opening chapters of Leviticus, identical to the Masoretic text. Not similar, not approximate, identical to the letter across 1,000 years of copying performed in candlelight by people whose names the world has forgotten. But the second layer of the finding was quieter and, in the end, stranger. Hebrew manuscripts do not only contain letters, they contain spaces. Carefully placed gaps between sections, marking divisions in the text, marking pauses for the reader, marking the seams where one passage closes and another opens. These spaces are part of the manuscript tradition. They are part of what scribes are taught to preserve. When the Ein Gedi scroll was virtually unrolled, the spaces matched. Not just the words, the architecture, the breadth of the text, where it paused, where it broke, where it resumed, was the same architecture used 1,000 years later in synagogues across the world. The scribes had preserved not only what was written, but the shape of how it was written. To preserve a text at this level of fidelity, across this much time, through this much disruption, is not the work of casual copyists. It is the work of something closer to engineers, sacred engineers, people for whom each letter was load-bearing, each space a structural element, each manuscript a vessel that could not be allowed to crack. Some scribal traditions counted letters. They knew the middle letter of every book. They counted words. They counted verses. They knew exactly how many times a single rare word appeared in the Torah and where each occurrence sat. If a single character was malformed, an entire panel of parchment could be set aside. If a single line was wrong, the scribe began again. These were not techniques of memory. They were techniques of guardianship. To copy a text this way, a person had to give up speed. They had to give up convenience. They had to give up, in many cases, large portions of their own lives. The reward was not authorship. The reward was preservation. What the AI revealed, layer by layer, was that this guardianship was not an exception. It was the rule. It was the labor underneath every page that survived. The scribes had not been preserving a story. They had been preserving an object, one they believed had been entrusted to them, a vessel they had not been asked to interpret, only to carry. Which brings us, finally, to the question that the scrolls have been quietly asking for 2,000 years. Why? Why would generation after generation devote themselves to this? Why would 1,000 scribes, across 1,000 years, in 1,000 places, choose this kind of discipline? The simplest answer is also the most uncomfortable. They believed the text was not theirs to alter. They believed they were holding something that had been given, and that whatever the cost of preserving it, exile, fire, persecution, the loss of their own names from history, the cost of changing it was greater. This is not an argument from faith. This is what the data shows.
The machine that read the burned scroll did not assume reverence. It measured, it compared, it counted. And what it counted again and again was evidence of a discipline that does not arise from indifference.
Now stand back and look at the whole picture. A scroll burned to charcoal in the 6th century, read in the 21st by a machine that learned to see through fire. A library of 1,000 manuscripts hidden in caves, copied by hands that the human eye could not distinguish, but that artificial intelligence finally could. A text whose words held still across 1,000 years of disruption, and whose silent spaces held still with them. For a long time, the assumption, even among careful scholars, was that ancient texts of this scale would, of course, drift, that copies of copies would, of course, distort, that the further back you traced any sacred document, the less of it you could trust. The Dead Sea Scrolls do not support that story. They support a different one, a story of care that has no obvious historical parallel. Artificial intelligence did not give us a hidden Bible. It did not give us a forbidden gospel. It gave us something quieter and harder to absorb. It gave us the scribes, the 1,000 silent hands, the shape of a discipline that lasted longer than any empire in the room while it was being performed. The Ein Gedi scroll survived fire. The Dead Sea Scrolls survived empires. And the text inside them survived everything that should have erased it. For 2,000 years, in cities you will never visit, in rooms you will never see, scribes whose names no one wrote down counted letters in candlelight. They did it knowing they would not be remembered. They did it anyway. And what the machine found in the end, beneath the words, beneath the spaces, beneath the fire, was them.